This is a podcast of host meets entertainment journalist. The host, Paul Davidson of Smithtown, New York, grew up believing that he would never truly be happy until the day that he could sit and listen to a 97-minute feature-length audio commentary for the crowd-pleasing 500 Days of Summer. The entertainment journalist, Piya Sinha-Roy of Surrey, England, did not share this belief. At least, she did not until that fateful day she relocated to Los Angeles, chasing a dream of entering the hallowed halls of writers who had come before her, landing in the City of Angels the same year that the Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Zooey Deschanel starring film was released. It would be a story of aspiring entertainment journalist meets Marc Webb feature film. It would set in motion the dramatic events that would eventually bring her here. Paul meets Piya on November 4th. He knows almost immediately she's the guest he's been searching for. Yes, this is a story. Yes, this is a podcast. Yes, this is the sidetrack. Cue inexpensive Regina Spektor cover of the song Us. At least that's what I would have liked to have done right here, but you know, I'm not made of money. I don't know how much that would cost. In any case, welcome to the sidetrack. It's me, your host, Paul Davidson, and if you haven't guessed from the title of this episode or the beginning of the show, we are here to talk about Marc Webb's amazing, classic, amusing, structurally invigorating movie, 500 Days of Summer, starring Zooey Deschanel and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I like to give each of them equal billing. So in the beginning, it's Joseph first, and later on, it's Zooey. By the way, an anecdote, I lived in a neighborhood a few years ago. When we moved in, all of the neighbors did this thing once a year where they would get everybody together, and all the neighbors would come into the backyard, and it was, you'd stand in a circle, and everybody would introduce themselves. And the funniest thing, and this ties to Joseph Gordon-Levitt, is we get around to these to a couple, an older couple, and they introduce themselves, and their last names are indeed Gordon-Levitt, and they talk about their son. They have a son. His name is Joseph. As if nobody lived in Hollywood in the entertainment or worked in the entertainment industry. And at the time they said, you know, our son is an actor. Didn't make it sound like he was, you know, super successful. He just has a movie coming out right now. It's called The Walk. Robert Zemeckis directed it. So we're hoping it does well. In any case, I lived literally across the street from Joseph Gordon-Levitt's parents, never developed a relationship with them, and as a result, they will not be with us here today. But in their place, no, not in their place. No, she was our first choice. Piya Sinha-Roy, an entertainment journalist of stellar talent and conscience. To be completely honest, Piya has written for all of the big ones: Reuters, Entertainment Weekly, most recently The Hollywood Reporter, and 500 Days of Summer for her has a particular significance, and we will discuss that today. 500 Days of Summer is a Fox Searchlight release. It was a Sundance premiere. In my personal opinion, it is quite an accomplishment. Marc Webb directed the film. It went on to generate $60 million worldwide. I think the budget was under 10, which is generally, as Piya talks about in her commentary, the Fox Searchlight model. Make it for under 10, generate over 50, some awards components, home entertainment, dollars, cable, and streaming. There you go. That's the business model. But enough about business. Let's get right to our sit-down, our virtual sit-down over the internet with Piya Sinha-Roy here on the Sidetrack. So here we are with Piya. Piya, how are you today?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm good. For people who are listening to this in the year 2025, I'm wondering how the world looks then, but We are recording this on November 3rd in the early hours of the Pacific Standard Time. So we have no idea where the world's going to be tomorrow or a year from now, but I'm hopeful.
I mean, this is the perfect distraction because I am a massively nervous ball of energy right now. So,
Yes.
yes, I'm really glad we're doing this. The world could look very different tomorrow, and
It
I'm
could.
very
We're in our
anxious.
own little bubble, and that's okay.
We're
And like I've said just so many times on the podcast, it's nice to have movies that can take us out of the day to day chaos. Chaos and stress doesn't matter who you're voting for. We all have stress and daily anxiety. And it's nice to be able to focus on a movie like 500 Days of Summer, which is both clearly one of your favorite movies, yes,
Yes, I love it so much.
and clearly one of mine. One of the things that I love about the movie is I'm a huge structure fan. I love how the film plays with structure in such a way that you're all over the map from there's no narrative through line. And so what I wanted to do for the show is here we are in minute one of our 42 and a half minute interview. Don't ask me how I know how long the interview will end up being. But real quickly, I want to take us to minute 42 of the interview. So hang tight. Piya, thank you so much. That was such a great interview talking about 500 Days of Summer.
Thank you, Paul. It was so wonderful to be able to talk about one of my
You're
favorite
very
movies.
eloquent. I appreciate all the compliments throughout the podcast today, and thank you for taking the time. We will go to your commentary of 500 Days of Summer. Well, actually, I'm going to take us back to minute two of the interview. Hold on one sec.
Okay.
So, anyways, thanks for joining us today, and let's start, Piya, since we're at the beginning of the interview, with where it all began for you. This is my James Lipton moment. Are you born in Surrey, England, or do you transplant there as a child?
So I was born in Sleepy Hollow, New York,
Oh,
which explains a lot about my rather bizarre fascination with um, horror stories, like really good supernatural horror stories.
this is
Uh,
you. Wait, you were born where in Sleepy Hollow?
Sleepy Hollow,
Okay,
Tarrytown, yeah.
how far is that from Amityville?
How far is that from where, sorry?
Amityville.
Oh, goodness. I don't. Okay, you're asking me something that I have zero idea
Did you
about because
not
I
have an
left when I was about.
understanding of the complete East Coast map of New York at the age of 2 months?
You know what? Unlike other New Yorkers who, just seem to really know their state really well, I do not, sadly. But I feel a good sort of, a birth connection there. So I always feel this like, little tug of the heart to New York. But I've actually never lived there after. I think my parents moved away when I was probably about one or two.
Okay.
So then they moved back to England. So yeah, I sadly really don't know much. I visited about 7 years ago, and that was actually when I discovered that North Tarrytown was actually Sleepy Hollow.
Right.
And then I went to see the apartment that my parents used to live in, and it is across the street from the park in which Ichabod Crane was chased by the headless horseman.
So you basically grow up in England from the age what
I did.
two till you come to Los Angeles for graduate school?
Pretty much, yeah. There was a 3 year detour where our family moved to the Middle East for a little bit when I was in my preteen years.
And so
But yeah, I mainly grew up in England.
what for someone like you who clearly has a significant background in both journalism and in entertainment journalism from an
Mhm.
early age, movies, television, entertainment in general clearly was a passion for you. So everybody talks about like what are those milestone moments or those milestone pieces of entertainment that you remember growing up that convinced you and made you say to yourself, I want to do this, I'm passionate about that. Like what are those key moments or those key pieces of entertainment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've been thinking about this one. I have very, very sort of clear memories of watching Back to the Future when I was very young,
Yeah.
like maybe
That's
gosh,
85.
3 or 4 years old. So obviously like not the year it came out, but I was probably about 3 or 4 years old when I'd watched Back to the Future, and I just remember thinking um Marty McFly was the coolest person I'd ever seen. I wanted to be Marty McFly, so I used to like try and, at that age I was pretending to be Marty McFly. The other movie I'd watch was Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, not the scary bit.
Not the
I
Temple of
spent a lot.
Doom, the very first one.
Definitely not. The Temple of Doom is a whole other conversation.
Right. Well, did you know, by the way, that that's the movie that forced the MPAA to create a PG-13 rating?
Which one? Raiders?
No, the second one. The second one was
Temple of Doom.
Yeah, the Temple of Doom was the movie. I think it's fascinating. Temple of
That
Doom was
is
the
fascinating.
movie.
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's the movie that forced the MPAA to create a PG-13 rating.
Oh, wow.
Although, piece of trivia for you, PG-13 rating was used first on Red Dawn.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, it's
That
amazing
is
when
good
you
trivia.
look at those John Hughes movies, which I'm going to ask you a question about in a sec.
Yeah.
You look
yeah.
at like a 16 Candles, which is a PG-rated film that has topless co-eds in the film as a PG movie. Then I'm trying to remember when that came out. I think it was like 80. We couldn't have been 87. Could it have been?
It was definitely some point in sort of that second half of the 80s, but I watched all of those movies in the 90s eventually, so
Yeah,
I'm
it's
not
interesting.
sure.
So you talk about the Back to the Futures and the Indiana Jones and even the John Hughes of the world. You're growing up in London. You're watching a lot of these films that are coming out of the States. For someone with your background, you're in an Indian family. I mean, you have a certain cultural experience for in your family and growing up with an extended family with a certain background, and then you're watching entertainment that maybe doesn't totally represent who you are and who you look like and what you look like as a person. What goes through your head as someone growing up watching those kind of films? Did your family kind of expose you to other entertainment that was more representative? Like what does that look like for you?
So I grew up, my parents are both from India, and they grew up in India, and then both my parents moved to England in their 20s. So but funnily enough, obviously by that point, the stuff they love and we were watching at home was Bollywood, and
Right.
Indian movies or even Bengali movies, because we're a Bengali family. And so we had those movies, which my parents have this huge like friend group in England of so many other Bengali families, and I love this because I realized how different my upbringing is compared to a lot of my other friends, because every weekend growing up, we were at somebody else's house, or people were over at our houses. I can't think of many weekends where we weren't visiting and socializing. And so my sister and I definitely had a lot of exposure to, other Bengali families. And through that, people would swap VHS tapes of Bollywood movies. Someone would have gone to India, picked up a bunch of movies, brought them around. So it was this like great, like massive countrywide lending library amongst the families and stuff. And so I watched a lot of Bollywood. Sometimes there were subtitles, but if there weren't, I don't know Hindi. So
Okay.
my mum and dad both know how to speak Hindi. I do not. So I felt a little sort of excluded right off the bat. Meanwhile, they love movies, but we didn't go to the movies. They loved movies being shown on TV, and we used to like record them on TV.
Right.
This is like back in the day with VHS
I know.
cassettes. So, you record them on VHS cassettes, and
Right.
we have stacks of, movies we had recorded, and there were movies like Kindergarten Cop, Short Circuit, and Short Circuit 2, which is a very interesting one. So in Short Circuit,
Well, yeah. How do you feel about
Stevens-
Fisher Stevens in Short Circuit?
Fisher Stevens puts on full-on brown face
Yeah.
and fake accent and plays an Indian man.
Yes.
And my parents, remember, this is like the early 90s, and we weren't seeing any Western movies with Indians in them.
Right.
My parents were really amused by this. It wasn't necessarily thought that it was inappropriate that a white guy was putting on brown face. My
Right.
parents are really amused by this. The story itself is very child friendly.
Yeah.
So we watched Short Circuit growing up many times. And again, like so much of these realizations about the lack of representation have only occurred to me in covering the industry, in doing my job over the last 10 years. Because I've just realized how damaging it has been that growing up in England, amongst, Western movies, Western culture, we never saw ourselves represented. And British Indians, by the way, are a huge, like chunk of the British, like population. So to be excluded from that. Meanwhile, we saw each other in Bollywood movies. We'd see people who looked like that, looked like us and that. And so I remember telling my friend when I was quite little in primary school, Indians aren't allowed to be in Hollywood movies. Indians are only allowed to be in Bollywood movies. And, saying it quite matter of factly. So that has actually stuck with me. But I don't know if I necessarily realized I was going to, I always knew I wanted to write. And when I was old enough to figure out what I wanted to do, I think I was around 8 or 9, and I decided like journalism looked really cool. So I kind of figured I wanted to be a journalist at that age. And I followed that through. And I honestly cannot believe I, actually somehow managed to make it work.
You wrote something somewhere in my exhaustive research. You wrote something about how, you have a sister, right? It's you and your sister.
Yeah.
How your father sat you down at one point and said, you're both women and you're Indian, and if you want to succeed, you are going to have to work your butts off to prove to the world that, these are not deficiencies, right? That's my word, not his.
That's very correct. Can't remember where I wrote that, but I know I definitely did. That's true. My dad, who, I'm very close to my parents, even though I live very far away. My dad sat us down, and he's always, and it was a regular pep talk of like, you're going to have to work. It wasn't even like you're going to have to work. You have to work 10 times harder than your white friends, than anyone around you, because that's just how unfair the world is. But he always said, you can 100% do it. And I have to say, I'm so grateful that I have two parents who absolutely championed me and my sister to pursue what we wanted. There was zero pressure. And this is why I don't like the stereotype portrayals. There was zero pressure to go into any, kind of career path that we weren't interested in. At no point. And because I think I wanted to be a writer since I was a child, at no point did they ever say, Piya, you must be a doctor or an engineer or an accountant. Thank goodness. They were so engaged. My dad did so much research in helping me, in my teen years of sort of figuring out what do I need to do for journalism, and how they honestly are brilliant. And my little sister went on to study environmental science because she loved like sustainability and how to make the world kind of a better place. And so, and now she works at Deloitte. And so I think it's incredible that like my parents have been so supportive, but the one thing they did always say was like, be smart about your decisions. Like, make sure you find a career where you can be successful. Don't struggle in your careers. Like, find something that will pay you well, that you'll be happy in, because they know, like, at the end of the day, a solid career and living in comfort are the best things you can do to be like, kind of the best versions of yourself. So what is it about journalism, about writing, about the entertainment space that was like in your mind when you think, when you're young and you think about certain careers, you have an expectation in your head that you built up, and it may not be 100% the reality of what the experience is going to be. I remember as a kid, I said I would go to movies and I said I want to make the movie trailers when I grow up, not realizing until later that it wasn't this glamorous job. It was, post-production houses with editors editing together, footage, mandated by people at a studio, right? It wasn't the creative endeavor that I had imagined. And clearly that's not my job.
I mean, I'm the
Wait,
much
it's
more
not
lucrative
Cameron
job of
Diaz
doing.
in The Holiday. That's not what movie trailers are.
That's not. So for you, what was the pie in the sky, the blue sky imagination that drove you to go after this career, and then how close was the reality to the original expectation?
I just knew I really liked writing,
Yeah.
and I've always been a very curious child. And I'd read the Sunday paper with my dad. Like, he would get the paper. We'd sit and I'd literally sit in his lap and read the paper as a kid, or he would read it to me or whatever. And I really loved that. I was reading about the world through this paper. We live in a small town in England, and
Right.
we in the 90s we didn't have the internet, and so the only versions of the world I was seeing was through my screens and through the newspaper, or through books. So I really loved that, because I was learning about new things, and I think that was sort of the planting of the seeds. Then the other one, which is a funny one, is around the age of 10, X-Files came out.
Okay.
And I should not have been watching the X-Files at 10.
No, not at 10.
But my mum loved the X-Files, and I would sneak in into the room and watch it along with it, because it was like that cool show that everybody was talking about at school, where it's like, oh my God, have you heard of this show called the X-Files? It's too scary. You can't watch it. And I was like, I'm going to watch it. So I'd sneak in and watch it. Eventually, mum was just like, you can sit here and watch it with me. And honestly, I know this is going to sound so ridiculous, but that show, just Mulder and Scully, and Mulder's constant questioning of the government and the truth is out there. This is not what it seems. I've got to say, I think it planted something in my head of keep asking questions. The story is not always what it seems, which is not a bad way to approach. I think as a journalist, you have to be quite dogged about not being waylaid by any of the crap that someone might throw at you saying, no, this is the story. And it's like, well, no, it isn't. And maybe some of that I have to attribute to Fox Mulder.
So are you as a journalist, I mean, there's a very distinct chasm of thought between Mulder and Scully, right? Mulder fly by the seat of his pants. If there's a germ of something, he's chasing after it, and then Scully is much more rooted in logic and what she can see with her own eyes. What are you as a journalist? What percentage Mulder versus Scully are you as an entertainment journalist?
Oh man, that's a really good ratio to judge journalists by. I would say I am probably about. Okay, so I think I'm probably realistically about 70% Mulder and 30% Scully, maybe. Okay. But I think the other thing was that as a kid, I hated Scully, because I was just like, oh, she's such a buzzkill. Just let him believe these things. And then you grow up and you realize, I mean, Gillian Anderson, by the way, one of the very few female characters in this brilliantly strong role, and she is still a hero of mine today. But yeah, just her. I think now, as I got older and I've rewatched X-Files more recently, I love Scully and the way she looks at things. And that, by the way, is the journalistic sense of you can find a weird, wacky, wild story, and journalists get so excited by that. But then you have to actually go and dissect it and look at the realistic elements of it. Where are the facts of that story? That is what Scully does. It's actually, I say 70% Mulder. I hope I'm more Scully, actually. But I think
do you put this under the special skills on the resume for the next job? It's typing speed, contacts, and 60% Mulder, 40% Scully.
Yeah, I think that's a very good ratio for people to then. But
because if any journalist that doesn't follow a story that isn't 100% baked is not a true. You're just reporting the news at that point. You're not uncovering stories. You're not. You're not delving into places that people haven't delved into before. So you need at least 50% Mulder and 50% Scully in your DNA. You
need the Mulder to find the story, and I've definitely there is a good reason why one of my very first published story in the LA Weekly, which I think sadly that publication has gone through so many changes, but yeah, it was a this is so dumb. Please don't go look it up. It's embarrassing. It was a story about UFO hunting in LA, and it took me. It was a project for journalism school, and then I actually sold the story. So it was my first published piece, and it was honestly still to this day one of the most fun things I've gone out to do, and it absolutely indulged my X-Files nerd. Like I was Mulder on a mission on that story. So I did indulge it. You have to be a little bit Mulder to go find the story,
Sure.
you know, and have the kind of the excitement and the passion to pursue it, and then you've got to bring in the Scully to like look at it objectively, dissect it, and bring the facts of the story to light. So I think a good journalist will be 50-50.
Okay.
I might be more 70-30, but
that's okay. So you come to LA. I'm going to do the Cliff Note version of this because I have a bunch of other questions about the aftermath. But you come to LA, you're at USC grad school to get your MA in journalism. You work at Reuters for 6.5 years. You work at Entertainment Weekly, The Hollywood Reporter. When you look at those three distinct places, like when I look at Reuters, EW, and THR, I think of EW as much more of the populist pop culture, and this is just my perception. You're going to tell me how I'm wrong. EW is very pop culture centric. It's very big entertainment. Reuters to me feels much more news focused, and THR seems much more business and industry focused. Am I right? Am I wrong?
Yeah.
How does it break out from your perspective?
Yeah, I actually love that my last 10 years encompasses those three.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important that I started my career at Reuters, because Reuters is a news wire service that services 1 billion people a day through text, video, and photos. Which means that like 1 in 7 or 1 in 8 people in the world have seen a Reuters story every single day. That is insane. That's crazy. That audience is insane. But it means that everything I looked at, everything I wrote came from that perspective of like, how do people care about this elsewhere? And so the other thing was that even though I did 2 years of journalism grad school and came out with a degree, I stepped into Reuters, I hustled for a job, and I stepped in and had to learn journalism 101. Like the 4-paragraph hard news story of like who, what, where, why, how, writing a solid news lead, all of that. Like we were not taught that very well at all at grad school. We were taught everything else. It was like,
you would think all the W's would be the first day.
Right. It's like we knew we had to do that, but we didn't practice that. Like there was only one class that really taught news writing, and there's only one lesson of that class that taught how to write a lead.
I mean, what do you come out of 2 years of grad school for journalism at USC? What do you I mean, people that go to like grad school for like the Peter Stark producing program at SC come out with context. Like that's the whole thing, is you're building a list of context to produce. What is the concrete thing you can take with you from 2 years at USC journalism school?
I wish I really knew the answer to that. A lot of people, like, I've been honest about my experiences. I didn't love it.
Yeah.
I know they now offer a 1-year version, and I would have much preferred a 1-year version, because I think the other thing was, weirdly, that we did the student newspaper alongside it, and then there were assignments I was doing as the entertainment editor for the student newspaper, like going out to a red carpet and stuff like that, and like, that wasn't valued in any way. But I just always thought, if I'm going to be in LA, what is the industry in LA? Right. And I see other people in my class trying to do politics, and they're like trying to do politics in the Middle East, or like, politics in DC. And I'm like, all right, well, to me, that's ridiculous. You're in Los Angeles. There's so many different things happening here with like the environment, with local politics, with our economy, with our social justice movements happening here. So and to me, I just thought, well, and I've always wanted to cover the arts. And so entertainment was the easiest thing for me to like find an interest in, and then just go full hog on it. Yeah. But I didn't have a bunch of contacts or anything. I do notice that because I'm covering entertainment, I come across a lot of SC people, and there's that little, like, I don't put it obviously in any signature or anything. No one's going to know I'm from SC unless, they
Right.
mention it and I say I'm also from there. But once I do, there is a bit of a, oh, you're another Trojan, great. But it's
Well, you do
never
wear your
benefited
Trojan
me.
hat in every interview, don't you?
I mean, I'm wearing it right
Right,
now,
of course.
obviously. But yeah, no, for me, the contacts weren't really there. But I've noticed there is a huge network, and it is nice that that network exists. But I don't know if I would recommend.
Yeah.
I don't recommend the 2-year version. I think if you really want to, the 1-year version is probably a better. You also the tuition fees are really high, so make sure you know what you're getting yourself into.
I mean, what do you say to? I mean, I would listen. I was the editor of my school paper. There's like a tens of thousands of editors of their high school newspapers across the country. There's probably a subsection of those folks who read Entertainment Weekly and think to themselves, "That's where I want to be." What do you say to somebody who is passionate about that?
Yeah.
And they want to work in that space, and specifically. I mean, you could say EW because that's your experience, but any entertainment magazine or, other than like the 24/7, there's a lot of entertainment writers who are sitting by their phones 24/7, and it's just about the exclusives and the breaks, which is a little bit different than like a biweekly or monthly magazine like EW. Correct. But what do you say to folks like that who want to be in that place? How do they get there?
So for me, I think, I learned how to write really tightly and concisely to the news at Reuters.
Yeah.
And I made sure, because I was based in LA, I covered everything. So I was covering any breaking news of the day. I covered court scandals. I would run down to that downtown LA courthouse so many times to get, depositions and papers filed. And a lot of those involved celebrities. So that was where the tie came. I was covering breaking news constantly. I was on a certain celebrity's death watch, sadly, for like 2 years because we were so worried she was actually, going to die. And I hate that.
Did she
those
die?
Are things that I hate. She did not.
She never died.
Goodness. She did not die. No, she was just very reckless and young, and everyone thought she was going to. So it was like a perpetual, hey, be on hand in case she dies. You're the person who's going to have to go and report it.
Were you constantly updating a piece about her death?
No, it was more that we're just constantly knowing that if anything happened, I would have to be the one who's on that story.
But so this is fascinating. So this is a youngish actress, yes?
Yeah, there's a lot of young talented people who went through issues,
yes.
And they behave recklessly and erratically, and that's all captured, and it's all tied back to there's a police report that, so-and-so was behaving erratically. And that's where you just have to be aware of what could possibly happen. Or just, I didn't love that part of it because that's a constant anxiety and, you don't
Right.
want to be. One of the first things I had to report at Reuters in my new job was, it was one of the hardest things I've done too, was when the night Whitney Houston died. And I was 2 or 3 months into my job at that point. It was the night of Clive Davis's pre-Grammy party, and I was going to the Beverly Hilton to cover the party. And all of a sudden, 2 hours before, it's I get a call, and it's all right, you have to go there right now. Whitney Houston died. It's what? And it was just this, to date, one of the most surreal experiences. But I hate those. I hate having to report those stories. Those were the hardest ones. I was on the red carpet having to ask people coming into the party, hey, how do you feel about Whitney Houston dying? And it's just they didn't know.
Yeah.
They're what? And it's the whole thing was so surreal and weird. So I did not love those elements of it, but I did 6.5 years of covering breaking news and learned how to get very, very good at it. On top of that, I was covering movies. I was covering TV shows. I was covering awards. I was covering industry trends. I got to, at Reuters, you have an eye towards business and industry. So I was doing all of those stories. So after 6.5 years, I come out rounded with this very, very solid background in all of these areas of entertainment in LA. And what that meant for me was, a lot of people decide to become very sort of focused on a beat. I did the opposite, and I became really, really kind of well versed across the board in everything.
Right.
And so going to EW as a senior writer, sort of with a focus on film and awards, oh my goodness, like my entire like life kind of shifted. I was like, I'm not on breaking news anymore. I didn't know what to do with myself. And unfortunately, even when breaking news is still happening, I would still sort of be like, hey, can I help? Do you want me to call anyone? And
Right.
other people didn't know how to do that necessarily. So if someone died, it's like, all right, did anyone call the police? Did anyone call the coroner's office? What's going on? And then I would end up doing those calls and report it, just feeding reports back to, whoever's writing. So yeah, it was, I don't think if you've been in breaking news and for a while, I think you do have a weird whiplash from leaving it. And then when I went to THR and I was the senior film editor, I was back on like the breaking news beat, managing a team who was handling it. And it is like a level of anxiety that you have to manage it. And I know how to do it very, very well. But the whiplash from that after you're done with it is like, I was so burned out, like so burned out.
Yeah.
This year has been a lot of trying to sleep it off in a way. But yeah, I think if you want to go to EW, which is a great place to be, learn how to write news. Too many people, and I noticed a lot of the junior writers, they didn't really know how to write news. They were writing almost opinion or essays. Right. They were putting themselves
They were like
articles.
bloggers, right? They come from a blogging space.
Yeah, you are not a blogger. Learn how to write news. That you have to earn the use of I in any story. You have not earned the use of I if you have not been in this industry and writing real pieces for a long time. Even now, I do not put I in a story. Like, I'm not talking about myself in a story.
Right.
I find it so I can tell immediately the talent of a journalist when I see them using an I, and if they are not someone that I know of, and if they're junior, I'm like, no, you're not a good writer in my opinion. I would be hesitant to hire them, but I would also be like, if I did hire them, I would, that would be one of the first things I'd whip out, because you don't do that, that's not news writing. So yeah, I think there's, to me, it's like, learn how to write news, and then the great thing with EW is if you know how to write the foundations of news, you can then have fun with it. Then you can put little jokes in there, put some color, put some details, you can go off on little tangents, because that's what makes an EW story a really great story. And one of my great friends, Anthony Bresnikan, who is now at Vanity Fair, he was at EW for many years. His name's synonymous with it. And he's a great writer. And you very rarely see him put I in any story. Even though these are very personal experiences sometimes, but yeah. So I just think, find that kind of, be smart about how you're choosing to write news.
Well, and so a lot of what I've learned about journalism, I learned from obsessively watching the movie How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. And, it's a great, I hope somebody does that movie. I may have to do that commentary myself at some point. It's not a joke. I love the film. But even calling it a film, maybe people would question my judgment. But this is we'll tie to a question. Kate Hudson, in like the first 2 minutes of that movie, she comes into this magazine. The magazine is known for how-to pieces, right? Mm-hmm. How to get out of a ticket, how to whatever. Yeah. And she's showing her coworker this piece that she's passionate about, how to bring peace to Tajikistan, I think is the piece. This is her character's arc, her goal. That's what she wants. She wants to stop having to write what they tell her that she's supposed to write, despite the fact that that's what the paper's audience and demographic wants. Right. See how this all comes full circle. The question for you is, in your time working at all of these places, significant places that have a very significant and specific demographic, were there types of pieces that you felt like you couldn't get the cover or support to write and never did, that you wished you had the opportunity to, much like Kate Hudson wanted to write her story about Tajikistan?
By the way, journalism in movies, and especially the rom-coms that I love so much, unfortunately, is so misportrayed.
Even 13 going on 30?
Even 13 going on 30.
All right.
27 dresses, all of it. All of these movies do a horrible job.
It's not how it works. All right.
If you want to know, Devil Wears Prada. Well, Devil Wears Prada was probably the most realistic about an experience.
Okay.
But yeah, and I started my career in fashion in the year, I think the year that movie came out. So that one's a good one.
Yeah.
But goodness, okay. So the sort of idea of getting a cover story is obviously it's a big deal.
Right.
I only have two to my name, and I am proud of both of them. It is difficult. There are certain places where you get pigeonholed in certain ways, and this is where representation comes into a conversation. Quite often, if you come into a place and you say you can do everything,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that all these other people are seeing you being able to do everything. They start to pigeonhole and box you in and start to decide, actually, this piece is better suited if that guy over there does, that kind of thing. And I think after 6.5 years of being at a place, Reuters don't have covers or anything like that, they're not a magazine, but after 6.5 years of being there, where I was allowed to do everything and had to do everything, really, we had a tiny team, and I was covering all of entertainment with one other person, so it was a lot, but it also meant I never put any barriers on myself. And then going to other places and finding other people put boundaries on me and my skills, that's very frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hold myself back. I know what I'm capable of. And so yeah, it was frustrating when it's like, hey, what about this cover? Like, there were certain covers that came along where I'm like, I was the right person to do that story.
Right.
But unfortunately, there's a lot of like internal politics that go on and things like that. And so, I wasn't the one that got to do the story. And I always say, like, the best person should write the story. Like, the best person for the story should write it. Who's got the most knowledge for this subject matter? Who knows this the best? That's how it should work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very, and I just, I realize that's a very
That's very Scully of you.
It is very Scully of me, but that's, to me, it's like meritocracy. I hoped that's how, certain places would be. But of course, you learn these lessons about workplace, sort of, I don't know, workplace politics, I guess.
Yeah.
But like, certain who's curried favor with whom, and who's sort of, laid in some groundwork from a while back. And so, to me, unfortunately, what that means is that you get cover stories that may not be as good as they can be,
Yeah.
And it always makes me sad when I see that, because I know the potential for what some things could be. And, and as someone who has been both a journalist and an editor, the other part of me is like, if I myself am not writing something, sometimes I see something, I'm like, oh man, I wish I worked with a writer on this, because we could have just really, really punched it up,
Right.
made it stronger. There's a couple of areas that we could have added in or asked more questions about. Like, that's what a good editor does. And a lot of my experience as an editor comes from the fact that I didn't have those editors. So I had to take all the things that I wished I had in editors and then just try and encompass those when I became an editor. And I think, it's really difficult to like find that right balance. But yeah, I do think, I think finding those obstacles, those walls put up against me, has affected how I view my profession and whether I want to return to it, whether I can return to it.
Right.
Journalism has been a struggling industry, and that's why I honestly can't quite believe that I've managed to make a pretty successful career out of it in 10 years.
Yeah.
Where I was able to get great staff jobs, well paid, which is, difficult to find in this industry, but I was lucky. And I got to live and work in LA and cover this incredible industry that's so fascinating, and meet people like you, Paul. So I
Yes,
love that, and I'm really
true.
glad I got to do that. But I do wonder right now if if there's a better platform for me to move into where I perhaps won't face these same obstacles.
Perhaps, if I can make a suggestion, greeting card writer.
I was thinking about that. I was like, hey, like, I genuinely, if anyone out there is a greeting card writer, please hit me up. I want to ask you more about your job.
I mean, the question, which is a good segue to 500 Days of Summer, in which our lead protagonist works as a writer of greeting cards, is how accurate do we think that representation in a movie is of that world? I don't have the answer. I suspect it's as political as working at EW.
I will say I wouldn't say never. I've very, very rarely seen newsrooms and journalism portrayed properly on TV or in movies. There are some great movies, like I think a movie like Spotlight, which is fantastic, like investigative journalism story, or oh my goodness, what's the Aaron Sorkin show?
The Newsroom?
The Newsroom.
Yes.
The one that actually has it in the title.
Let's talk about 500 Days of Summer then, because I already used my segue card with the greeting card question.
You did.
So talk to us. I mean, we have a whole commentary, which is great. But at a high level, like, when did you first see this movie? Where were you in your life? Why this one?
I saw this movie right as I moved to LA. And I'm really trying to remember if I saw it in England or if I saw it in LA. I can't remember, but if I moved in the late summer of 2009, and I had never been to LA before.
Oh, wow.
So my knowledge of LA was coming from The Hills, other movies set in LA, and then 500 Days of Summer. But I honestly just, the amount of love I have for this movie, it's because the story itself has evolved so much for me as a viewer. I've honestly revisited it. I think I watch it pretty much every year somehow, and it has changed as I've gotten older.
Yeah.
I find new things to look at in the movie itself every time I see it. And I just think it's such a great, masterful way of documenting like a millennial like couple. Like these were the experiences that felt so much more real than what I was watching in movies and TV, and that it captured a city that I have now so completely fallen in love with. But at the time, I had just arrived, and it was that initial crush of like, oh my god, palm trees, sunshine, crazy wildfires, and I was just like, this is a really magical place.
Yes.
And I just remember thinking like, yeah, this movie, for whatever reason, it came along at the right time in my life for me to just like absolutely, I love it so much. I love the cast of it so much as well. It just captured something really special to me about that moment in my life. It will always remind me of that 2009 moving to LA moment. I am trying to remember though where I saw it. I think I saw it in England right before.
Well, it was Sundance of 2009, so January, and then I have to believe that summer is when it came out. From Searchlight.
And I'm trying to remember if I saw it, like it would have been right before I left England, or it would have been right after I arrived in LA. Like I remember watching it right as I moved.
You know, it's interesting. I said in the opening, which you'll hear after the fact, but I lived across the street from Joseph Gordon-Levitt's parents when he had done The Walk. Like we had a whole neighborhood get together, and his parents, everybody was announcing, you know, who they were, and they said, you know, this is who we are, and we have a son. He's an actor. He has a part in this movie called The Walk, and hopefully it does okay.
The lead.
But the funny thing too is at the time 500 Days of Summer came out, and on our social account I linked to this. At the time I was working at Xbox, and we did the series called Cinemash, where we had actors come out. And, you know, like we had Christopher Mintz-Plasse and Common do Training Day, and we had the Reno 9/11 guys do Point Break, their version of it. And we had, I remember I was at the shoot, we had Zoe and Joseph, to help promote 500 Days of Summer, do their own kind of improv scene of them playing Sid and Nancy, which is a reference in the movie. And it's this crazy, like 4-minute sequence of them playing those roles in a hotel in downtown LA.
Oh my god, that's amazing.
It's super crazy. But that film, I don't know of another film that plays, as we talked about in the beginning, plays so adeptly with narrative structure, and I love the way that how a story, what you know about characters and the dramatic tension can be built based on how you reveal information and when. It's just it's so interesting. It's the kind of thing that, like, at the beginning of film history, it would have
Yeah.
made people's heads explode to even contemplate that you would do that to an audience, that they would even be able to understand it.
And this is what I love about, like, I've got to say, like, Scott Neustadter and Michael Webber. I mean, they are brilliant in what they've achieved with the script here. And I've actually read that script a few times because I really, really love it. Because but I also, as you know, someone who studies storytelling, you know, I wanted to see how they did that. Because it's like, it's all very well when you're seeing it on screen, but it's like, how did they conceive this? And it's fascinating. Like you said, it's about that choice of when to reveal certain information and then dissect it. And I just, as a storytelling device, like to do it in a non-linear fashion it is such a challenge, and it can more times than not go very, very wrong.
Yeah, which reminds me, let's go to minute 23 of the interview. Hold on one sec. What was the best celebrity interview you ever were a part of?
I have a few. I don't think there's one, and I get really nerdy with these, but I honestly really, really love speaking to filmmakers and people who are just like really intelligent about their profession, you know?
Yeah.
And so amongst my favorites are people like, I think one of my favorites is Richard Ayoade, who is a British filmmaker and bit part actor as well.
Oh, wow.
He did this movie called Submarine, and then another one I think called The Double with Jesse Eisenberg.
Yeah.
He's brilliant, and he's quite a shy, introverted person, and we were having lunch, I think, which is rare for me to do as well. And he just. He did, yes, he did. He had a shirt with little spider print all over it, and I just loved it because I didn't notice it initially. They're tiny little spiders, and then eventually I was like, "Oh my goodness, he's got spiders crawling all over his shirt. It's amazing." He was really introverted, but finally, the second half of the interview, he started to relax and talk about his craft, and I really love that. Ricky Gervais, I spent about 2 hours with. He's a very fascinating character, but I again really appreciated a very open conversation with Dan Radcliffe, Margot Robbie, Robert Pattinson is another favorite. I mentioned him I think I mentioned him before. Yeah, just, you know, I love speaking to, like, I had a great conversation with Ben Stiller about like The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, which, you know, you're going to judge me hard, and I do not care, but I love that movie.
Actually, it's a good movie. It's the best movie trailer ever.
Yes,
ever.
Definitely. I love the movie trailer on that one.
With the Monsters and Men song.
Oh yeah, that's such a good movie. I might have to rewatch that tonight.
Yeah. Hey, let's go to minute 53 of the interview real quick. No, and the structure of 500 Days of Summer is just groundbreaking, I think.
I think so. I think it's so smart. If you're studying screenwriting, this is a movie that you know, I recommend highly. It's truly brilliant.
Well, what's great is people now have 97 minutes on their hands, which I think when do you not have 97 minutes to spare? You can queue up 500 Days of Summer. It's a fascinating listen, really fun to hear Piya dig into the why of this movie, all the W's that USC didn't teach her about, that she just inherently knew. And at the end of listening to this commentary, will we still be holding to a 60-40 Mulder Scully commentary, or is it different?
I still maintain I'm a 70-30, just because I'm much more of a wild card than, you know. But I think maybe as I get older, maybe I'll hopefully be more like Scully. I think Scully is the person we should aspire to be like. And Gillian Anderson is a goddess. So yeah.
I think a lot of people would agree with you. Well, listen, Piya, it's me. I'm thinking myself in multiples. Really appreciate you taking the time, not only to walk people through just the how and the what of being an entertainment journalist, but taking the time to walk us through 500 Days of Summer, which if you haven't seen, you're in for a treat. And I want to thank you for all the time and that you put into this. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been, yeah, this has been so fun. It's so nice to revisit an old movie. It's always really lovely to catch up with you.
Definitely. All right, folks, here it comes on the sidetrack.
Hi everyone, this is Pia, and I am here to watch one of my favorite movies with you guys, and also talk through it, which I know is generally not the polite etiquette on how to behave with movies, but on this podcast we do things differently, which is very exciting. This is one of my favorite kind of cozy weather movies, and it doesn't rain much in LA, but we're going to pretend. So I'm curled up on my sofa, I have my cup of tea, and I'm under my big fuzzy blanket because this is that kind of a movie. So if you are ready, let's go ahead and hit play. All right. By the way, I love this like Fox fanfare that plays because nothing makes me feel more like I'm about to watch a really cool movie. I just realised this is the Fox Searchlight Pictures fanfare, which obviously it's no longer Fox Searchlight because Disney bought Fox and now it is just Searchlight Pictures. But Searchlight is like home to some of my all-time favorite movies, like all the Wes Anderson movies. It's movies like Juno, more recently movies like Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. It's just really, it has that sweet spot. Oh, Jojo Rabbit from last year, from Taika Waititi. It's that sweet spot of making movies in that under 20 million budget. And it's one of the very, very few places that offers that home for filmmakers. So I love that it still does that. Oh, we're in the opening of the movie. And this is one of my favourite opening scenes because that bench actually exists in LA, but it's in a park that's closed off to the public, which is really sad. But it's in downtown LA, and this entire movie is such a gorgeous love letter to downtown LA, which is not a part of the city that's actually given very much love. And when I first moved here, I went to graduate school at the University of Southern California, which is in downtown, sort of south of downtown or wherever it is. And I spent a lot of time in those first couple of years I've been here hanging out in downtown LA. And this movie actually came out the year I moved here. So it's kind of became my guide to downtown LA. I made a note of all the locations and went off to visit them because I was that person, still am. And it's actually a really fun tour to do if you want to go do the 500 Days of Summer downtown LA tour. I highly recommend it. And I do love that this movie kind of really sets up that we're about to like watch something. It's a rom-com that is not a love story, and I like that right off the bat you're being set up to expect something very different. And I think that's what Searchlight, I've noticed, the movies that they tend to support, they do that. They allow for originality from storytellers, whether it's a movie like Beasts of the Southern Wild. It was one of the most like imaginative films I'd seen in a long time. Or just, I love Wes Anderson. I love his movies. And I think, just allowing filmmakers to tell original stories like on scripts that aren't usually based on any other IP. That's huge because most studios, most networks, most everything now, all the content we're seeing being made is actually based on some type of former IP because everyone wants so desperately to have an audience already attached. But this movie was like made for for an independent budget. It premiered at Sundance Film Festival in 2009 and was acquired by Searchlight, and went on to do pretty well, I believe, if I remember correctly. I'm trying to remember what this did, but it came out that summer, and it actually, I think it did really well in the box office. I know it did well in like England, which is where I had seen it just before I moved. I think it made like 60 million at the box office on a budget of like 7.5 million. Like this is like Searchlight's sweet spot. So this movie very much defines what they do. So like there's downtown. It's so pretty. I'll show you my work, one of my former workplaces where I spent 6 years. I think that's why I have so much love for it too. It's a really fun place to be. Also, I love that, like, look at baby Chloe Grace Moretz. She's so cute. I remember I think this movie came just around Kick-Ass time, if I remember correctly. I think Kick-Ass was 2010. So yeah, like it was interesting. Chloe Grace Moretz was like really the precocious kid du jour, really, and she really crushed those roles. I mean, she's so good in Kick-Ass. I think that she just does such a fun role with this. Look at Joseph Gordon-Levitt being all sweet. Now, I grew up watching Joseph Gordon-Levitt in Third Rock from the Sun, and then he was in one of my all-time favorite movies, 10 Things I Hate About You, and he's one of those actors that I feel like I've really grown up with, and he just always seemed incredibly smart about what roles he was picking, because I don't know, like he's kind of done the full array of everything. He's done like big horror, small horror. Remember when he was in Halloween H2O for a second? That was really fun. He's done some incredible like indie movies. He has a great partnership with filmmakers like Rian Johnson. In fact, I'm dying for him to get back to work with Rian Johnson again. And what I didn't realize was that Joe did a little voice in Knives Out of a detective, and I had no idea until I like looked that up and thought it was really fun. But those two have such a great relationship, from Brick and Looper. Two movies that are like great, like original movies. I think, you know, Joseph Gordon-Levitt does a really good job seeking out that creativity and really like great original storytellers. And that's it's interesting that this movie actually it's by a first-time feature film director, at least Marc Webb. This was his first movie in 2009. And it was after like more than a decade of him directing music videos for like loads of really cool like early 2000s pop and like rock, kind of emo rock bands, which was like the thing back there. That was like mainstream back then. And he's done a bunch of music videos year after year. And this was his feature film debut, with two first-time screenwriters, Scott Neustadter and Michael Weber. So I love that like the trio of them are like, this is their first movie, because they just delivered something so fun and original and unexpected, and also very relevant for like the millennial dating experience. It really subverts the gaze that we see rom-coms told through usually, and in this movie we get to see Tom go through the roller coaster emotions and heartache that we usually see the female leads go through, but in showing it through him, it also kind of, you get to really see his like immaturity, and this is a movie that for me, when I watched in my early 20s in 2009 when it came out, I was like incredible, like I was Team Tom on this, you know, like I hated Summer. I thought she was so annoying and like couldn't figure her out. And now, a decade later, older and wiser, I realize how much this movie really deconstructs expectations in relationships, and how you can really choose to see things through rose-tinted glasses and choose to see what you want to see, which is not something I really understood back then, because I only ever wanted to be like Tom and see things my way, and if it wasn't my way, I was going to throw a big tantrum about it, which is what I did when I first moved to LA and like decided I was going to like, you know, try and date every aspiring musician I could, which is a terrible idea, and never do that. I'm kidding. You can do that if you want. Go have fun. Um, so yeah, I think like this. I just like that this movie really stands out for what it did with the genre. And it's, there was some commentary about like this not being super original or whatever, that it's taken bits and pieces from every rom-com and mashed them together and then flipped it. And I'm like, but that in itself is original. Like, romantic comedies are really, they're quite simple at the core of it, right? They just play on love. And that is a universal theme. So, there's only so many ways that you can do a tale of like heartache and redemption. The kind of boy meets girl, girl meets boy type thing. And what I like about this movie is that it just started to have fun with that, in the same way that like when, I know this is a random comparison, but when like Scream came along and decided to have fun with the horror movie genre and like parody some of the tropes that you are so used to seeing, flip it on its head. And that movie is a proper slasher movie. It was a great teen slasher movie, but it also was a satire of its own genre. And that's what I kind of love of 500 Days of Summer as well, that it's poking fun at the tropes of rom-coms. And it doesn't promise that we're going to get a happy ending. In fact, it tells you right off the bat that it's not a love story. So, yeah. By the way, the music of this soundtrack is so great. I actually still have the soundtrack in some of my playlists, and so sometimes it'll pop up when I'm like driving, and whether it's the Smiths, or like Temper Trap is on there, or even the Hall & Oates song. I kind of love it because it's just like happy and it's very of its moment. Like, I've got to say, maybe it's a movie, or maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a soundtrack. It's so quintessentially 2009. Like, that was the soundtrack I was listening to then for the rest of the year, and it always reminds me of like the summer I moved to LA, and it always reminds me, it's so sort of LA centric as well. So I don't know if like I love this movie even more because I moved to LA that very year, and because like I just felt, because I was in downtown, and I just felt like I was kind of living through, watching these two people fall in love in a place that I just moved into, and it showed so much potential. I don't know. I was also super emo and cheesy, so what you gonna do? I don't know any real greeting cards writers, but if there is anyone out there who writes greeting cards, can you tell me if this is a lucrative career idea for me? Because I'm curious. I'd like to know. I have never met anyone who writes greeting cards, and I always imagine it would be a very fascinating job to have. I just don't know it. I'd like to know more. So if you're out there and you do this for a living, please hit me up. I want to hear what this is like and see if I can somehow sneak into a career for it. I think I'd be really good at coming up with cheesy lines. I can't think of any right now, but I'll save it for the cards. I think there is something actually really sweet about Tom's, background as an architect and his way of looking at the city through the eyes of an architect is really fun. I think so many times when we see LA, we're seeing it through the eyes of the entertainment business, and we're seeing it through the eyes of like these sort of wide-eyed actors or creatives trying to create something like and be famous or something, I don't know, success in that way. But I like that this movie, there's no actors, everyone's just doing normal jobs and living in living that normal 20s life in a city. And getting drunk and having fun. Like, that's how we're seeing all these experiences, and I think that's what's really relatable. And I think Tom's love of architecture for downtown LA made me see downtown LA so differently. It made me sort of realize how much the history of the city, because LA is a very new city compared to where, like, I grew up in England, so, you know, I live next door to a 650-year-old house that had a whole bunch of ghosts and history and all of it. So like, history in England is very different. Like, everything around us is so, you know, I think my primary school I went to, while I was there, we celebrated, like, I don't know, its 200th birthday or something. It's crazy, but history's everywhere in England, and America in comparison is so new. And especially like West Coast, as you know, LA was like founded in the 1800s, so the city of Los Angeles, I mean, it kind of sprawled out of downtown LA. And so the earliest studios, the earliest businesses were all based there, and you can see remnants of that still. It was just really cool that, like, this movie decided to set itself there. If you go and, you know, there's the hotels like the Biltmore. I mean, those places have been around for many years, and just, you know, the relatively new history of the city is kind of all encompassed in those bricks, and in the designs. And I just think it's really cool. I had a friend who wrote books on an architect who designed many of those buildings. I'm trying to remember his name. Isn't that terrible? Oh my goodness, I've completely forgotten that name. What was it? He was a British architect as well. It'll come to me. John Parkinson, an English architect who came out here and designed many of the iconic LA buildings, which is kind of really cool, actually, because we see, like, the Bullocks building here. I think we see City Hall. I don't know if we see inside of Grand Central Market, but I know he designed that. And then Union Station, so when we see Union Station, that's a John Parkinson building. So yeah, and my friend's name is Stephen G, and he's written a couple of books of John Parkinson's work in LA, and I highly recommend them if you're interested in the history of this town, because he really did his research. I do just love, I always forget that, like, I love that there is this great, like, tie of, you know, this English architect who came out here and just built these gorgeous places that still exist and sort of still capture the vibe of the city. I don't know about you guys, but, like, I've been in lockdown since March now. I haven't really gone anywhere, and watching this movie makes me miss going out so much. My friends and I, like, when we first moved here, my friends and I would go to the bars downtown and go drinking and do karaoke, and it was just so fun. The crowd's different. The crowd is different downtown too, where it was like there's a lot more kind of sort of working professionals rather than like the entertainment industry. So they're more like bankers and lawyers, and it's just different. It didn't feel pretentious. There weren't like bouncers, you know, telling us we couldn't come in because of how we dressed. So yeah, it's just really, it's making me miss all of it. I hope some of these places are going to survive, you know, this very difficult year. I know that one of my favorite places, which I don't think is featured in this movie, is Clifton's Cafeteria. I've just had some really, really cool moments. Like, I think in 2015 or 16, when the Twin Peaks revival happened in Showtime, I went to the premiere of that at the Ace Hotel downtown, watched first like 2 episodes, which were insane. And then we walked over to Clifton's, where they had completely transformed each floor of Clifton's into a different sort of Twin Peaks themed room. But it fits so well, like Twin Peaks is such a great thing to fit in with that. And in the middle of Clifton's, there's a giant redwood tree that just sort of sprouts out of it. So it's amazing. And at the very top, not everybody knows about this, but there's an incredible tiki bar that you go through a door that looks like a mirror. So you have to find that door and you go through it, and then you go upstairs and there's entire tiki bar, and those drinks are so strong and great. I highly recommend that. I really hope Clifton's is going to be there for once we emerge back into the world. I love when Summer says this, because that's exactly how I felt when I moved here, where it's like, I've just moved to a new city, I'm young, I just want to enjoy life right now. And I love that, like, the guys are like, oh my god, you're a guy because you think that way. Because God forbid there be an independent single woman who's happy with being single. But I actually do love that, like, Summer says that here and kind of makes that very clear. And it's something to remember, by the way. Like, she laid the groundwork down for Tom very early on in specifying exactly what she wanted and most importantly, what she didn't want. And Tom really, really just thought he could change her, change the way she feels, change the way she thinks. And she had already decided that, you know, she didn't want anything serious. She wasn't looking for anything serious and didn't see it with him. And I think it was just, it is, again, like, once you've seen this movie so many, and I've seen this movie so many times, once you've seen it so many times and you really realize, like, she's saying exactly what she wants, like, what she feels and where she's at. And I think in that sense, she's so much more evolved. But we never get to see much of her life because this entire movie is Tom's story. And I do think that's what's so... I wonder if that does her character disservice. I wonder if it does disservice to not explore the kind of non-conventional female lead of a rom-com and we only ever see her as this kind of mystery elusive figure through Tom's eyes. We never really learn much about her life, and I do wonder, like, how this movie might have been different. There was a film that was made, oh gosh, it's a little while ago now, maybe about 7 years ago. Give me a second as I think of it. What was it called? Oh gosh, it was, how can I forget? It was The Disappearance of Eleanor Rigby by Ned Benson, which came out, I think that was 2014, or maybe 2013, can't remember. But anyways, that movie I thought was really fascinating too, because it kind of it plays with that idea of the perspectives. And I know that the way that Ned had made it was he did it in the 3 segments, which was, one was the man's perspective, and the guy's played by James McAvoy. The second one, I think, was her perspective, and that's Jessica Chastain's perspective. And then the third was them, which was, you know, the movie shown through them. And I remember watching it and just thinking, it is really fascinating when you decide to shift the perspectives, because you're essentially telling an entirely different film, an entirely different story, of course, because you're telling it from a whole new character. But the fact that we never see, like, through film, all the rom-coms and all the, like, romantic dramas and stuff we see, we're actually only ever really seeing it from one perspective. Usually we're never getting both sides of the story, even though you're the camera and the audience and you're looking in on the story, you're the observer, you're still never seeing a clear picture of what's actually going down on both ends. And I think that's what another thing that this movie kind of really, you know, puts a spotlight on, that like no matter what's going on, you never see the full story, which I think is really clever. I'm like a really big fan of rom-coms, although when I was younger I wouldn't have admitted that, because I thought it was really cool and I only watch really cool like edgy indie movies. But I love rom-coms, and I've probably seen most of the major ones that have come along in the last, you know, 25 years or so. I'm sure there's some glaring gaps as well, but what I love about rom-coms is that they really are like, I always look at it, I look at movies in two different ways, which is as a film journalist for over as an entertainment film journalist for over 10 years, you know, when I went to watch or cover a movie for work, I always watched it through very sort of analytical eyes, and I was paying attention to specific scenes and taking notes. But as just a viewer, consumer of movies, I immediately just gravitate to lighter things. And so I'm very unlike, even though I have like a lot of experience covering awards and prestige drama, which I love doing for work. Those movies are so great and fascinating to deconstruct. But like in terms of just Piya the viewer, I'm always going for like really fun, light, comedic, like rom-com, or just, you know, like even like action, big action, explosive, like big pictures, or like horror movies even. I love things that I don't feel like I need to analyze in any major way. And yeah, I just kind of, I think indie movies though actually are where they sort of, the movies that I would spend days at Sundance watching, they're the ones that kind of encompass all of those areas though, because they, you know, these storytellers tell stories in such compelling ways, so they, you know, it's elevated genre pieces, and I just think it's really fun that like I think the indie community is where I really found like my sweet spot of like, these are the movies that I can bring my like film, so, you know, like my journalist analysis to, but also be able to enjoy it like as genre pieces for what they are. Like this is exactly, I didn't go to Sundance until 2012 for the first time, but I can imagine if I was watching this in the Eccles Theatre in Park City, I would be really happy after. I'd come out and I'd immediately like be like, I'm like in a good mood. You walk through the snow back to Main Street, go find like a little party to hit up, or a bar and get some drinks, and just, it would put me in a really good mood. So yeah, I can imagine this it was received really well and at Sundance, and it would definitely be one of the ones that people would be talking about, you know. If you've never had the chance to go to Sundance, let me just say, I love Sundance so much. It is, you know, one of the film festivals that I've actually done fairly regularly since 2012. I think 2012 to 20... Oh no, I went this year as well. Like, gosh, I'm forgetting that. I think from 2012 to 2020, I think I've done at least 6 Sundances. Some of them are on my own. The first time I went was on my own, and I actually went for the full duration of 10 days. And I went through work, but we were staying in these like big houses just a little bit away from Main Street, so it wasn't walking distance. And remember, January in Park City, Utah this is a mountain town. It's snow everywhere. So it's not super easy to get around. So you try to find like a place near Main Street so that you can like get on those buses to hit all the theaters easily, or else just walk. Once you're back on Main Street, you can walk up and down, and all the events and parties and networking things are all taking place just on that street. So I love like that. The first time I went, I was there for like 10 days, and no one generally stays 10 days. Like, you have the first round of people fly in, and then they leave sort of halfway through, and then you have the second round of people come in for the second round of premieres, and then they leave at the end. But I stayed the full 10 days, and there's a huge award ceremony at the end, and it's just, oh my gosh, it's so fun. Like, the camaraderie amongst everybody. You can go and say hi to anyone and everyone. You meet so many people. Everyone's excited. There's a real air of like collaboration and possibility, and it's just a very unpretentious place, which, having done a lot of LA-based things as well, or just even doing a film festival like Toronto, which I also really, really love, but it's a different air of kind of exclusivity to those things. And Park City with Sundance, like, I guess I've been really lucky to do it as, you know, journalist, and at reputable publications where I get all access really to anything I want to go and do. So it's just been so incredible to go and like see these. Like, the first year I went, I was on my own and kind of a little nerve-wracking, but I started like, you know, talking to more people. And then I think by the time 2018 came along, I just remember 2018 being such an epic year on the streets of Main Street, because I had like a group of like 25 friends who were all there through their various works or like filmmaking, and you're just bumping into people, watching movies like all throughout the first weekend, attending some really great conversations. And I just felt that spirit of like festival mode, and it was amazing. So yeah, Sundance, if you ever have a chance to go, and or if you ever have a chance, if you're a filmmaker and you have a chance to apply to the labs that they do it. It's incredible community, and there's so much love for film within it. There's so much love for originality. You know, Hollywood's gone through a major reckoning with its diversity issues, but I will say at Sundance, not to say that Sundance, you know, was doing it perfectly by any means, but when it comes to representation, it always surprised me that I'd go to Sundance and see so much more representation across filmmakers and subjects, and then come back to LA. By the way, this scene where I love this scene so much, where he sees Han Solo in the car window. That scene is actually in the screenplay written as Paul Newman. So I don't know why I wonder if they changed it to Han Solo because of Joseph Gordon-Levitt's love for Star Wars. If you remember, he dressed up as Yoda at the Last Jedi premiere. It is like by far one of the best like red carpet photos I've ever seen, and that's also why I love Joseph Gordon-Levitt, because the dude just does what he wants. But yeah, I wonder if they put Han Solo into that scene for Joe. But yeah, it was meant to be Paul Newman in the script. If you're into like reading scripts, I love the script for this. Scott Neustadter and Michael Webber, who have gone on to write, you know, movies like Spectacular Now, The Fault in Our Stars, and they're writing, I think they're doing the Daisy Jones and the Six series now. Also, Fault in Our Stars is becoming a Bollywood. Oh no, it was made into a Bollywood movie this year, so they have their names attached to that, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I love that these guys. I don't know. I'm losing track. But yeah, if you read that screenplay, it's such a great lesson in like non-linear storytelling, because this movie does jump through so many different vignettes, and it doesn't keep chronological time. So yeah, if you've been toying with the idea of telling a story in that way, this is a great screenplay to read, and there's so many fun things in it as well. It's one that I go back to quite often. By the way, I love that you've met Nicole Brown and Clark Gregg in this. Now, if we remember this year, so this is 2009, right? So Clark Gregg had just come off like doing Iron Man, in which he played Agent Coulson in 2008. Now remember, 2008, Iron Man comes along. Like, there was no Marvel Cinematic Universe. That was the movie that kicked it off. So 2009, the summer movie landscape was not necessarily, I mean, of course there were blockbusters, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe was not in full force yet. So so I kind of love that we're seeing Clark Gregg right at his, like, the beginning of his Marvel career. And then Yvette Nicole Brown is incredible, and I forgot that she was in this, but yeah, she's just one of my favorite people. She's so funny, and also one of the few non-white actors in this movie. You know, I say this is one of my favorite movies, and it is, and I mentioned diversity at Sundance. I was raised in England, but my parents are Indian, so I grew up in an Indian household, and I'm very, very proud of my Indian roots. I speak fluent Bengali, and it's so fascinating to look at how I grew up, what I watched as I grew up, and what content there was out there, and how much I was represented. And in all honesty, like, I have a little sister as well, and we talk about this often. We never saw ourselves represented in any movie or TV show or anything. I think, you know, I still remember when, like, even in England, like, I still remember when they, you know, had these long running soaps in England, like Emmerdale and EastEnders, and I still remember when they had, like, the first Indian family come in EastEnders, and meanwhile, like, you know, the Indian community in Britain has been there for decades now. So the representation on TV has never caught up with how our population looks. And still to this day, I have to say, like, I don't think I've ever seen myself represented on screen in any way. Don't think my sister has. Like, there are people who've come, of course, there are some really great, there's more South Asian talent on screen now than there was, but those stories are still pretty, for the most part, the most famous versions of these are still fairly reductive. Or caricatured, and I think we're finally sort of getting to more three-dimensional characters, but I don't think we're there yet. And so just thinking about this movie, and looking at the cast, who, they're an incredible cast. Like, yeah, I'm not going to sit here and be like, none of these people should have got this role. I don't believe that at all, but it's so glaringly obvious to me that this is pretty much an all-white cast, and, like, really, I mean, none of the friends, like, most of the colleagues, like, nobody is really, you're really not getting very much diversity, or diversity of characters, diversity of perspectives, cultures, or anything in here. And that is very in keeping with pretty much every rom-com I ever grew up with, pretty much all movies, but, like, rom-coms especially, where we've talked a lot about this, where it's like, you never see, you really don't get to see non-white leads. And when it comes to Asian, South Asian characters, if we are featured in those at all, we're so sidelined, and we're so kind of like a kind of a dorky sidekick or whatever. You don't get to see those characters ever have that storyline for themselves. So what I love is that, in 2017, we saw The Big Sick come along, and, that was Kumail Nanjiani and Emily B. Gordon, who are real life husband and wife, but they wrote their love story, their very complex love story out for a movie. And it played really well, and they got Oscar nominated, which they deserve. And that movie is actually now, it's considered a rom-com, even though it kind of wasn't built that way. But it's an indie movie. I remember seeing it at Sundance in Eccles, and I loved it. And that movie became an example of, like, oh, look, this is what it means to have, like, an Asian, South Asian lead, a South Asian, like, romantic lead. And the movie wasn't even written that way. It was just, it wasn't designed to be like a genre piece in that way. It was just their story, but it played out that way. And I just think it's crazy to me that we're still having those conversations. Like, I love that Camille, this year was in, a really fun rom-com with Issa Rae, The Lovebirds. And, I like that we've come here in 3 years, like since The Big Sick, we're getting to a place where we're now getting, really great non-white leads who get to fall in love. And like Issa and Camille is such a great pairing. Or, having like Always Be My Maybe on Netflix with Randall Park and Ali Wong. Like, I mean, yeah, like we need to see more of these. And I just think, as someone who's grown up loving rom-coms so much, I never, ever, ever realized, what it meant to not have my own, like, representation of myself or people that look like me in them. But I'm really happy that things are changing. I think we've got some like really great male leads out there. My friend actually was like the romantic lead in the Hulu Four Weddings and a Funeral reboot, and it made me so happy. Like, he's British Indian, and it made me so happy that, like, I was telling him, I was like, you get to be the first like South Asian rom-com lead in a series. Like, that is epic. It's so exciting, and it was so fun, by the way, to like watch him and Natalie Emmanuel like go through a very tumultuous journey but fall in love. And it's not a spoiler, it's Four Weddings. But it's just so lovely to see like non-white leads go through those same experiences that we for decades and decades have just seen only white characters go through, because like I said, rom-coms, just the universal theme at the core of it is love. And like, if you don't get to see that play out through like characters that represent the population at large, it is very damaging, I think. So I do love that like the change has come more now, but this movie in 2009, which was directed and written by white guys and stars pretty much an entirely white cast, I think unfortunately that was the state of the industry back then. And so I think in terms of representation, this movie probably wouldn't pass my diversity test, I guess, now. But I do think this movie could be told in a new version now. And I keep saying, like, I would love to see Chloe Grace Moretz. So we see Chloe Grace Moretz in this scene. I would love to see her take like a sequel or some movie that picks up with her character, who would now be in her 20s, because she would have such a different way of existing in the world, and I would love to like see that play out, I think. And I imagine if they make that movie or show, it would be a much more diverse project, because I think casting directors and showrunners and network heads and executives are all so much more aware of like wanting to, or knowing they need to, I should say, not even wanting, like need to represent something that's a lot more reflective of the town we live in, the world we live in. It's kind of crazy. Not to just like go on about diversity, but it is something that I have covered extensively through my career, because it's what happened when I sort of entered the space. Like, if you look at the people who reviewed 500 Days of Summer, which it has a pretty great 85% score on Rotten Tomatoes, but if you look at the people who reviewed it from back then, it's predominantly white dudes, and a lot of them are much older, and they actually sort of bring up like they didn't get it, they don't understand it, or they don't think it's got much meat to it. And I think it's so fascinating that these were the arbiters of what is good, what is taste, what is cinematic, and what is, you know, worthy of our praise and what isn't. And it actually really irritates me that, like, I don't know how cinema has become so kind of skewed to only be viewed through the tastes and the eyes of just one part of our demographic, which, you know, in this case tends to be, you know, older white men, which is also the demographic that still makes up the majority of the Film Academy, the TV Academy. And even though now in the last 5 years there's been a huge push to diversify, and new members are being brought in, that diversification, you know, is still not balancing everything out yet. So yeah, we still get, I mean, this is why Green Book won the Best Picture Oscar. You know, it was not, you know, if you're a person of color, or especially if you're Black and you're watching that movie, I don't think you're sitting there and thinking, oh yeah, this is a movie that's really delivering a super intelligent, in-depth conversation on racism. And it's fascinating now to me. It was a perfectly good movie, but it felt to me very dated, and some parts felt very off. Which, by the way, I love, like, Tom just punches that guy out and then gets knocked out right away. But yeah, with Green Book, that happened just 2 years ago. That movie just won like 2 years ago. And what was fascinating this year was watching HBO's Lovecraft Country, which I thought was just so smartly retold through a Black storyteller and Black, you know, showrunners and cast. But we see the story of sundown towns and, you know, the actual real Green Book in use. And I couldn't believe that, like, a movie called The Green Book actually did very little with the actual Green Book and didn't go into those things that then this show actually does so well. So yeah, this is what it means to have, this is just an example of what it means to have authentic storytellers. And that is something I come back to over and over and over again: authentic storytelling, authentic storytellers. And I think that's the only way we're going to start to see real diversity in, you know, movies and shows and, you know, behind the scenes as well, is if you start to, you know, start to really kind of bring the right storytellers in to tell the stories from the correct perspectives. I shouldn't say correct, but, like, you know, the perspectives that have been overlooked for so long. And I just think about, like, for how many years, like, rom-coms even have just, these are stories that predominantly have been, you know, centered on women, and from their perspectives, but so often we're still only getting those stories told by men, and that's fine, you know, they can tell the stories, but I realize how much I want to see these movies now told by women. If they're centered on women, I want to see female storytellers telling those stories. If they're centered on people of color, I want people of color writing those stories, and bringing their own nuances to it, bringing the authenticity. And that is why Crazy Rich Asians worked so well 2 years ago, where they actually were able to, you know, by having authentic storytellers at the core, we got to have this really beautiful, big, splashy, like, you know, summer rom-com, obviously based on a book, but, like, it was just so, it really, really nailed the nuances of those cultural traditions. And that's something that I don't think they could have done if they had gone with a white storytelling team. In fact, I'm very sure of that. So yeah, I just think it's, you know, I was thinking about, like, one of my favorite movies, rom-coms, which is My Best Friend's Wedding, a movie that actually, like 500 Days of Summer, doesn't have the expected ending. And it is written and directed by men, and it is centered on Julia Roberts' character. And that's a movie that, like, I have watched, again, so many times, like dozens and dozens and dozens of times. is actually one of the first it was the first movie I went to go see with friends on my own at the movie theatre when it came out. And we had a little bit of trouble because, you know, the age to see it was rated 12 in England, and we may have been 11 and a half. And we were asked show ID, and I don't know what ID you're meant to have at 11 and a half. And then they weren't going to let us in because they're like, you don't have a parent. And we're like, I think one of my friends started crying, and then they eventually were like, okay, fine, go in. Which I love. But yeah, I just remember going and watching this with my friends and like absolutely falling in love with watching the story play out. And I loved Julia Roberts, and I was so on her side for some reason, and I hated Cameron Diaz because 11-year-old me was like, no, you know, like, yeah, she should be with that guy, not this girl. And of course, over the years, my understanding of the movie has changed exponentially. Julia Roberts' character is a monster in it, and Cameron Diaz's character is actually deals with things really, really well, given the fact. But yeah, I just think it's really, it's not that that story shouldn't exist, or, you know, that it shouldn't have been done the way it has been done. But I always keep thinking, what would have the female driven version of the story have been? You know, the story itself stays the same, but what would a female writer have done with this that could have been different? And that's all I sort of ask for when I'm looking at diversity and representation. All we're asking for is, you know, to consider a more authentic perspective telling this. And that doesn't mean that, like, a white guy can't go in and tell a really, really great story centered with, you know, people of color. I'm just, you know, but I think if they're the only ones telling these stories and we're expecting them to get it right all the time, that's how you end up in a situation like we're in now, where there's a massive, massive lack of diversity on screen in Hollywood, and it's being rectified slowly. TV's doing better than movies, but it won't hit a balance until throughout the board, executives in boardrooms, the people who are greenlighting projects also start to diversify as well. So, yeah. But needless to say, this movie is lovely, and I do love it and watch it a lot. I think it's a perfect time capsule of 2009 and what dating as a millennial was like in 2009. I think things have changed so exponentially now with like dating apps, and how that creates very different level of like commitment and interaction in those early stages. So we see different rom-coms now, you know, like the story themselves. If you're looking for a present day rom-com, it's rare that we're necessarily, you know, we're going to get this version of the story. We're more likely to get, like, you know, something that involves more kind of digital contact anyways, because that's how we've evolved. Oh, look at downtown. I miss it so much. I miss going outside. I miss my city. I love this movie because it just reminds me of how every time I feel a bit dejected about LA, which happens, you know, anywhere you live, you can get a little exhausted by it, but just watching movies like this, or taking a drive to the beach, or just reminding myself why I love it. And like, LA is just such a magic. I mean, it's just, you know, despite all the like failings I see in the industry, and you know, have tried to sort of actively be a voice in changing, I believe like change can happen. And there's something, you know, like the kind of optimism that, not to be like too metaphoric with the movie, but the kind of optimism that Tom has in seeing this incredible potential in LA. Like when he looks at the city and he sees, you know, how he can like make it better, that I feel that like if there's ever a town that there is so much possibility, and the idea that anyone can come and like help change things and anything you want to be, you can try to do that here. You know, it's such a can-do attitude. I definitely feel like I still have that, which is nice. I think if you lose that, I don't know if LA is a good place to be. But if you still have that idea of possibility, I think it's a wonderful place to be, even in the crappiest times like now. But yeah. Oh, I do actually love this little like dream sequence in the movies. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, by the way, is an absolute Francophile. He is fluent in French, I believe, and I love that he always has a little bit of that in most of his movies. If you remember in 10 Things I Hate About You, he actually tries to be a French tutor who doesn't know how to speak French to impress a girl, and that always makes me laugh because he does know how to speak French now. I'm trying to think of so the last time I saw Joe was now I remember seeing him in at Sundance, at Comic-Con, which is one of the other places I went to every year for about 8 years running, and I remember, so if you've never done Comic-Con in San Diego, oh my goodness, it is crazy, and it's just wild, and I love it. It is the most intense 4 days I will spend ever. Like, when I was working at Reuters, I would literally be covering all the like major panels and announcements or doing interviews. Every hour of the day was split into like some crazy, like running across, you know, the convention center to meet with someone or go see a presentation. And I would be writing consistently, trying to, you know, get news out quickly about what movies were being announced, what new projects, what surprises were being announced. And I just remember like my biggest challenge was keeping my laptop charged. And so all I was doing was, you would usually find me, if I wasn't in the presentation, typing away on my laptop. I'll be running out and like trying to find a plug point in the, you know, sitting on the floor by God knows where in the convention, or just trying to type out a story. And usually, you know, someone come by and be like, you can't sit here, you've got to leave. And I'd just be like, 1 more minute, I need to file this. It was all very dramatic. But it was like this absolute adrenaline rush for 3 days. Like, I would be, you know, I would start at like 7 a.m. and go through till like 2 a.m. at least, because there's always, you know, events and parties and networking to be done. And they're really fun, you know, at Comic-Con they go all out. And I went to, I think it was for Looper that I actually went and interviewed Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Ryan Johnson in a very sunny balcony of like one of the fancy hotels, the Hilton, I think. And we had a really nice chat, and I've interviewed Joe a few times, including for his own movie, Don John at Sundance, and then I think also for the movie he did about the tightrope walker, Philippe Petit, in, I think that was like The Walk. And he's really smart. He's savvy about his characters. He can give you great like answers about, you know, his characters and what he dives into. He can talk eloquently about, you know, filmmaking. He has his hit record Community, and he talks about, you know, creating works with them. He's very professional, though. You know, he doesn't really, as someone who's grown up in the public eye, I think he's very reserved and very cautious. You can't really ask him about his personal life. Nor, like, I generally don't ask those questions. But, you know, sometimes I do think, you know, the question I like to ask, and I hope it's not too personal, is, you know, how might, you know, if someone's recently become a parent, like, how has that affected the way that they, you know, are seeing, what kind of characters are they now being drawn to play, you know? Because I think that is something that it's okay to ask if, like, there's something if you've had a big shift in your personal life, like, has that affected the way that you look at projects? Because acting is something that generally comes from such a personal place that, you know, I imagine if you're a new parent, would you maybe steer away from, you know, doing hard-hitting, heavy stories about, you know, parents who have to be torn away from the kids or something, you know, like, so yes, I sometimes ask those questions, but respectfully, I hope. And yeah, I think no one's ever bristled at that, because you can choose to answer it in a way that's very kind of vague, or you can choose to, I think it's okay because you're still asking about their process. But also this is something that I've, you know, have to navigate as a journalist, and this is one of the harder things to do, which is how do you sort of get those more personal, more real anecdotes and stories and input from, you know, these people who are so used to doing interviews over and over and over and over and over again. And it's something that has come from doing, at this point, thousands of interviews, whether it's, you know, 4-minute interviews at junkets, which I've done, you know, I have like 7-8 years of like junket experience of doing so many of those and sitting for hours and, you know, the Four Seasons Hotel and just, you know, waiting for my slots and then going in, and that sort of pit in my stomach for like the talent that I absolutely... So every time I like covered a movie, you know, for Reuters, we generally did fairly short stories within like 400 to 500 words. So, and you can break out multiple stories. Like, you know, if I go and I say I was covering this movie hypothetically, you know, I would do a breakout on Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and I'd do a breakout on the filmmakers, and I'd do a breakout on Zooey Deschanel's character. So those would be my 3 stories probably to make up the full kind of 500 days of summer package. But yeah, I think you have to maximize the time you get. And so for me, what I used to ask for generally, because with Reuters we also have a TV arm as well, so I would go into these junkets and I'd ask for the TV spot, which is generally a 4-minute spot with every talent. But because I would also write a print story from it, so I could ask for a double spot, so I'd get about 8 minutes, and they usually try to cut that at 6 because that's what happens. But, you know, sometimes you can... I always kept sort of my own timer, so I would look at them and be like, I know I have like 1 more minute. and the same people are running the junket, so they also got to know me really well. And, you know, as long as you're respectful, I think you're treated well by everybody, then everyone's fine with it, you know. But for every movie, there's, you know, the key talent that you absolutely need, which is you need the leads and you need the director, and those are like generally the 3 you absolutely must have. And then everybody else is like really great secondary and can help flesh out your story, so you can get great sound bites from them to really be, you know, rounding out the story you're trying to tell. But if you don't get the leads, you're kind of screwed. So I know that, like, I've been in those rooms where, and sometimes with the leads, you know, depending on the stars, who they are, they may not give you that double time. You may only get that 3 to 4 minutes. So I always had to be really, really prepared. I've got like dozens of notebooks of all the movies I kind of had covered, and I'd written all these notes while I watched the movies, and then I'd come up with like generic questions that I could ask of each cast member about the film, and then specific questions for like each of the key people I was speaking to. And then you go in and you have to prioritize, right? Lead star, I've got to get this, this, and this. And sometimes it was about the movie, like very specific to the movie, but sometimes it's broader than that. Sometimes you want them to comment on like the movie industry overall, or something that's impacting the industry overall in that moment. By the way, I actually love this scene. I'm just going to like sidetrack for a second. I love this scene because this is on the Amtrak. I guess they're going up to Santa Barbara, but I used to take the Amtrak from Union Station downtown all the way to San Diego for Comic-Con. And it's a Dreamliner. It goes by the ocean, and it is just the most beautiful train ride. I mean, I grew up going on trains all the time in England, and I lived in the countryside, so I appreciate a good scenic train ride. but there's nothing like a Southern California oceanside train ride. It's just, especially when the evening sun hits, it's just a golden glow. It's magic. Again, another magic moment I love. So going back to junkets, like it's this kind of crazy skill that I developed where you just know, in my head, I would just have the idea of the story I knew I was hoping to tell, but I also you never want to like plan out the story completely, because stories so often, you know, they change based on what people tell you. I always found the lead of my story, or the angle of my story, through the interviews I conducted. I realized if you have already pre-written a story in your head and you're just looking for sound bites to kind of shove in there, it doesn't work that way. I think that reads like a template. So I would go in, I would ask questions about the themes and characters and ideas that they explored. How does that, and the key thing I would always ask is, how does that connect with what's going on right now? Why now? Why does this movie exist right now? And why is it important for it to exist right now? Like, how does it lend itself to the discourse? Or, you know, I think when you ask those, it allows people to really think about why they've made a project right now, why it felt relevant to them to make it. And that's usually how you get that lead anecdote, or that key sort of meat to your story that you can then quite often use and get more quotes, you know, to flesh that idea out. So yeah, that's like one trick of junket interviews. And remember, these all change. Like, I worked at Reuters, so there's a very specific mandate for working at Reuters, which is you're writing hard news, and you're writing as a news wire service. You're writing news that, you know, services thousands of clients across the world. So I always have to think about, you know, how will someone read this story, say, up in Nepal, and connect to it. And funnily enough, there's actually a journalist in Nepal who used to message me sometimes after reading my stories and just being like, just read this, it's really great, this movie sounds amazing, don't know when we'll get it, but like, you know, they would put it in there, they'd put it in, and it was just really, it was always really good. I mean, because of like where I grew up, and, you know, I grew up in England, I've got family in India, I have a little bit of that perspective of like kind of understanding, you know, how does your story translate? Like, I just always used to think, how would my cousin reading this in Delhi react, you know? Like, would he care? That's what I always thought. Would he care? And that's what made it easier for me to, when I did my interviews, I would try and find things about, what is it about this person or this project that is interesting outside of like just the timeliness of this movie coming out, right? And I really liked, you know, that you have to be quite creative in being able to do that in like 400 words as well. And I think with 6 years of doing that, I think I got to really learn how to be a very concise, tight writer, and learn how to really work with my editors. Any journalist who tells you editors are not worth it, they are not journalists. And even in filmmaking and storytelling now, like in script writing, it's all about editors. Like, you need to be very receptive to critiques, because I've honestly generally only ever seen them make my writing and my pieces stronger. Not every single thing is going to be like, you know, is going to be relevant, but like, it's all about understanding what someone's trying to tell you. If someone's pointing out something isn't working in your story, and it doesn't matter if it's an article or a script or a novel, if someone's sort of pointing something out, it means to them it's not clicking. So even if the suggestion they give you is like not something you want, I think it's okay to just mark that as something that means it might need revision in some way. And I found that like either sometimes it's very directly taking exactly what they say and implementing that, or other times it's like, all right, they didn't like this, what could it be? And then sort of reading between the lines of what they said of why they didn't like it, and then figuring out, okay, I think it's because it needs a bit more explanation or a bit more setup, or maybe it just needs to be done in a different way, or maybe it doesn't need to exist at all. And all of those things are okay. So I think, funnily enough, as a journalist, I think I've learned, you know, how to tell stories in a very concise way. And I'm not afraid of like being able to kill, like, I've killed so many darlings in so many pieces, especially because at Reuters it's a fairly, you know, it's hard news, so you can't really get away with being too tongue-in-cheek or anything. And I used to try anyways, and there were definitely some headlines, some leads or anecdotes that I got in there, and it really depends on the editor you get as well, obviously, because some people, they value like, okay, this is an entertainment story, so we can have a bit more fun with it, and others were like, no, it doesn't fit the format, we're changing it. So yeah, it would just depend on that, and generally I never overthought it. There's a couple of stories that I wish were done differently, but I won't say what they are, because I'm perfectly happy with how they exist out there with my name on them. But that's when I went to Entertainment Weekly after that, and I was a senior writer, and honestly, we were left a little bit more to our own devices in being able to come up with the angle and how we chose to tell a story. And that's when I really started to get into a groove of trying to put more of my own voice into articles. And so it was really fun at that point to be able to like, because I knew how to write news, it was fun to then start to play with that, add more color. Like, I remember doing an interview with Robert Pattinson, who, by the way, is just one of my favorite interviews anyways. He's truly really funny, and you know, we're both English and we're about the same age, and after you just sort of get over like, wow, I'm sitting next to, you know, one of the hottest like stars of our generation, you realize you're just two kids like eating, you know, lunch and and you know, just chatting shit for a bit, and so, you know, generally what I tend to do in those sit down interviews, which I love doing, but only really have done more of in the past couple of years, because of after I left Reuters, I moved on to Entertainment Weekly and then Hollywood Reporter, where I was an editor. And so the longer interviews I've done now are more of a sit down one. And I really enjoy those. But I realize like I'm very clear about when I hit record and when I stop recording. And I've never taken anything that like is said after the recorder stops, you know, into account. But like, you know, I can see during an interview, I want people to relax, but I think they're, you know, they should be aware they are talking in an interview, because as a journalist, I don't want to have to be the one policing, you know, if they say something a bit silly or inappropriate as a joke, you know, and you write that out, I'm just hypothetically saying, and then you write that out and it reads differently or it's out of context. I don't want to be in that situation generally. It's frustrating to be in that, because context is so important, especially in today's day when everything is a soundbite like lifted and put on Twitter. So I try, when I do those sit down interviews, I make it very clear, like, I'm hitting record right now. Everything we're doing is part of an interview. And then once I stop recording, sometimes we end up like, I remember with Rob, like we ended up sort of chatting for like another hour or so, about life and stuff. And it was just fun, because like, that's kind of what happens as a journalist. Like, yes, you're a journalist and you're both there just to do your job. It's not like you're walking away best friends at the end of it or anything like that. But like, for a moment, you are sitting there and you're asking questions, you know, in-depth questions of a person. And so it is nice after you are done with asking the questions that they can maybe just relax for a moment and like and really sort of let go for a minute and just be a little bit more themselves and not feel like they're being scrutinized. And then, yeah, it made me, it's funny because like those are the things that allow me to like get a little bit of color of who they are. And I love that, like with Rob Pattinson, he giggles a lot when he tells little jokes, and mine are not even necessarily all that funny, but he's just sitting there giggling to himself. And he does this like giggle where he like giggles and sort of falls into a corner, and he's like, he's a very happy dude, and like it just made me happy to see him like that and capture a little bit of that color into the way that he has fun with his roles, because the roles that he takes are crazy. And it's the same thing I think with like someone like Joseph Gordon-Levitt, where I've never spent all that much time with him, but like it's nice to see them a little bit in their off moments, when they're not under scrutiny, when they're not being recorded, when they're not, you know, on the record, because you get to just see a little bit of that charisma, that charm, that, you know, natural charm come through. And yeah, with like the great actors, you really see that come through. And there are many I've seen who just, you know, kind of don't have any of that, and they're just kind of a very pretty face to look at. But yeah, the real talents, I feel like we get to see that. I haven't interviewed Zooey Deschanel that much. In fact, I don't think I've ever interviewed her outside of like a red carpet at an award show or anything. But my memory of her is she's, you know, really lovely. And you know, I did watch New Girl for many years, and I liked that was, you know, she was very well suited for that role, and it's all very cutesy. Meanwhile, like I think Joe's gone on to take he's taken on so many interesting projects and roles, but I feel like he's also taken a bit of time away from that, because I know he's got a growing family now. So I appreciate, like, you know, when people step away for a bit. But yeah, I mean, he's in the trial of Chicago 7. He has a couple of new projects coming up. This dude could take on any project and I would never be surprised. He does comedy and drama so well. He's a really intelligent actor, and I love that. I don't know what's up with like the rest of the cast in this as well. Like, where did Matthew Gray Gubler go? I think he's around, right? He was doing a TV show or something. Yeah, I don't know where some of these others are gone, but the filmmakers are still working. I know Marc Webb Marc Webb this was his first movie, and like it really kind of propelled him into, he got the Sony Marvel gig with Amazing Spider-Man and Amazing Spider-Man 2. So this is he's kind of a perfect example. And again, this isn't to deride him for his skills. He's obviously incredibly talented, and this movie did really, really well. But generally, like, Sundance has been such a great launch pad for like young white male directors, who can really, you know, through one Sundance hit, be able to go off and get the massive studio action superhero movie, right? And we've seen so many iterations of this. You know, we saw it with unfortunately he's become the poster boy for it, but Colin Trevorrow with Safety Not Guaranteed, and then, you know, getting Jurassic World and Star Wars. And I think it's not about like they shouldn't get it. It's just more about like, well, why aren't female and filmmakers of color getting these opportunities as much, right? And I just remember the year that Whiplash was at Sundance, and Damien Chazelle, who's fantastic and he's so smart, you know, that movie like got so much attention. And then there's also Dear White People that year with Justin Simien, who is also fantastic and so smart. And it's very, very interesting to see their respective trajectories. And that's not to say, you know, one deserves it more than the other or anything like that. It's just that Damien, who is a really intelligent filmmaker, had gotten the opportunities to then make La La Land and make First Man, and really kind of, you know, and do The Eddie on Netflix. And meanwhile, Justin was able to get Dear White People made into a series at Netflix, but his entire brand was connected with Dear White People only until this year, when he finally debuted his second movie, which is like a low-budget horror movie called The Bad Hair, which then got picked up by Hulu. And I think, you know, I was talking to him, and I did a story earlier this year that you can look up if you like, but about filmmakers of color and their trajectories at Sundance compared to, you know, white filmmakers there. And I think it's really disheartening to see that drop off. So, but anyways, back to Marc Webb. He is doing really great. He was attached to do. I wasn't sure about this. I'm still not sure about this project. But one of my favorite films is this movie called Your Name by a director called Makoto Shinkai. It's a Japanese animated film. If you're a fan of Studio Ghibli, you may already know of Makoto Shinkai. You may have seen the movie, but it was, I think, one of the top films of 2016. And it's being remade as a live action set here. I don't know about this because the animated original is gorgeous. It is just a breathtaking movie. It is an emotional roller coaster. It's stunning, and it captures Japan in such exquisite beauty. And I know so now the director of Minari, Lee Isaac Chung, is doing the live action, but Mark was initially attached to do the live action of that, and then I think they've decided to bring on Lee Isaac Chung instead. It's definitely one that I will watch no matter what, but I worry because it's such a challenge in my mind to adapt something that I thought was just one of the most perfect films anyways. But anyway, so Mark is now directing a live action Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs for Disney, I think, and so that'll be interesting. I'm sure it'll do really well. I think, Disney's live action princess tales and stuff are doing really well for them, obviously. Again, with the storytellers though, just personally, these are female-led stories, and I really want to see that reflected, in the storytellers. And I'm sure, Mark will collaborate with the right people and telling it right, but I just want to see more of that. So yeah, I do love when Tom draws this, when he draws his vision for the skyline of downtown LA. Also, should I paint a wall in my apartment and try this? No, I'm kidding. I should never. It's so funny that this is all we get to see of Summer's wedding. Imagine, rom-coms are kind of... The wedding scene in a rom-com is a big scene. That's where everything comes to a culmination, generally, or it's a big moment. And we don't get that here. There are two wedding moments. Obviously, the one they go to in Santa Barbara, and then Summer's wedding. And we don't really get to see the wedding. Oh, a little note on this park, by the way. It's called Angels Knoll Park, and it is right next to the Angels Flight funicular, which is now working, by the way. That was shut. So Angels Flight is the shortest funicular in the world, I believe, if I remember correctly, and that has been around since the 1920s. They actually featured it in HBO's Perry Mason series this year, which, by the way, loved that series. Loved seeing downtown in its former 1920s, 40s glory or whatever. But yeah, funnily enough, this park, I remember going to it early on and it was open and that bench existed and it was a plaque on the bench with the movie, commemorating the movie. But then I think sometime around 2012 or something, it got boarded up, it got fenced up, and I guess a private owner had bought it and fenced it up, so no one can go to it anymore. And it makes me really sad because I used to walk by it all the time. So you could walk down, you could take the Angels Flight for 50 cents from the top down to the bottom, which is a really fun ride. Highly recommend it. So I used to take Angels Flight, but I would walk down the stairs, or I would take the funicular and go to Grand Central Market for lunch. And then I'll tell you what, walking back up those stairs, if Angels Flight was closed, walking back up those stairs after eating a pretty fat meal at Grand Central, especially in downtown LA where it's pretty hot in, most of the year round. So I just remember one day doing that in 100-degree heat and nearly died. It was a journey, and I'd eaten a pretty fat pupusa. So yeah, it's not a great moment, but otherwise I love it. And it's such a lovely park, so I'm really sad that they've shut it off to the public. I never get that. Like, parks should be open to the public and enjoyed by everybody. And it's a tiny park. Like, who is it hurting? I don't know. Maybe we should set up a petition to reopen it. This is such a lovely, honest moment in the script. And again, just like thinking about rom-coms and how they deal with things, like there's no big fallout, there's no big explosive moment. This is just when two people are not on the same page, and I find it so frustrating that, you know, movies that have shown love on screen, like, remember, like, these are movies that a lot of us have watched since we were little and growing up with them, so they kind of do formulate our ideas of love and relationships, and so many of them just giving us what we now know is the Hollywood ending, the fairy tale ending. But that real life is so much messier. And humans are so much messier than that. Like, that was never really portrayed so clearly. Like, you kind of got like the jealous, crazy women. Like, I always think of Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction. Wow, that took me a second. But still one of the absolute best performances I've ever seen in a movie. Where I'm like sometimes wondering, I will not be ignored. But anyways, I felt like for so long women were just painted as either like this kind of hopeless, you know, sort of plain Jane type character who, you know, a very kind of handsome man decides to take a chance on, you know, against all the odds, which I thought was so silly. Or you have like the kind of crazy, you know, woman. And then there were so many, I know, like in the 2000s, like the first sort of decade of 2000s, there were a bunch of movies like Bride Wars and stuff that were just really tapped into like the worst stereotypes of women in love, or, you know, women looking to get married. Like, there were best friends, or hell, even sisters, like stealing fiancés away from each other. I was thinking about like 27 Dresses, or like there was that movie The Wedding Day. I don't know, it's just, I've watched all of them. I just keep thinking, like, why were the women so terrible in this? Like, did Deborah Messing really have to hire a male escort to take to a wedding? Like, really? Like, that's what happened? Like, is that real? Why is it so wrong for like a, you know, single woman who's successful in her career to just go to a wedding and, I don't know, on her own? Like, none of those things were normalized. It was always like, you could be successful in all your other parts of your life, and then, you know, if you don't have a relationship, you're a failure. Which unfortunately I think has coloured much of society's perception as well towards, you know, single women. So I'm biased in this, obviously, I have, due to my own experiences, but I also think like this is why I like this movie, because Summer does things on her own terms, and that's something that I am seeing finally a bit more kind of common, a bit more of a common thread in, you know, stories about relationships now. But it just doesn't, it was not something that really was explored, you know, I think. And so much whenever I read about, like, you know, the kind of makings of a certain film, and, you know, these, you've got to realize, like, these movies go through layers of like audience testing and things like that. And so I think when people are like doing things like that, that it's just getting into a situation where you end up going with what will make the masses happier. And I remember with my best friend's wedding, actually, that in initial audience tests, they weren't sure if audiences were responding to, the not happy ending, right? Like they were like, we need to like have her be happy and end up with someone. Actually, when I was at EW, we did a reunion with the Best Friends Wedding crew, and they spoke about this. But yeah, I think it's, to me, that movie should always have ended that way, because she shouldn't have got the happy ending, and she got a happier ending than she personally deserved. She was absolutely absolved of all her nightmare. Like, she actually tried to break up a happy couple and almost succeeded. And to me, like, the manipulation involved in that was crazy. So yeah, I actually think it's interesting how some of these movies have been shaped. And, our system has changed now, and, we have streamers now who are making rom-coms, and I love that there was a sort of rom-com revival 2 summers ago with like Set It Up and Always Be My Maybe and The Kissing Booth and all those movies that came along on Netflix. And they're different, they're told from like it's not necessarily the same level of testing and audience decisions. The storyteller is a little bit more diverse, and we're seeing something different and nuanced. And I like that the future of rom-coms is looking a little brighter, a little more colourful, and I appreciate that. But on rainy days, which there aren't a lot of in LA, but today's hazy. These are the movies I come back to, and I watch them, and I just feel like I escape just for, for an hour and a half. I'm in this world of, a beautiful little love story, and whether it works out or not, there's just something really cute. And this movie especially just means so much to me, because it really captures the year I moved here and fell in love with LA. And so, yeah. And now we're back at day 1 of autumn. And that is the movie. And I cannot believe I actually talked through all of it. That's kind of funny. Because I was worried I would not have enough to say. Turns out I can talk a lot. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope I didn't bore the hell out of you. I hope you enjoyed this little journey back to 2009 and the summer of love for Summer and Tom. Thank you so much.
And with that, we find ourselves at the end of yet another edition of The Sidetrack. It's me, Paul, saying thanks for joining. I want to thank Piya for taking the time to talk us through what a real entertainment journalist does versus what we seemingly believe that profession to be, thanks to movies like How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days and 13 Going on 30, which are, I may just point out, 2 quality romantic comedies. I also want to thank Piya for taking the time and delivering her feature-length audio commentary for Marc Webb's 500 Days of Summer. As always, we appreciate you guys joining us each week. We've got great shows lining up the calendar all the way through the end of this year before we dig into season 2, starting in January. Some awesome stuff coming. If you are listening and you've gotten this far, clearly you're a hardcore sidetracker. Yes, we will have our t-shirts and drink cozies with the Sidetracker logo available in our Etsy store before you can spell Etsy. And please leave a review, 5 stars here or there, some text with adjectives, with nice adjectives. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. So thanks again, and we'll see you soon on The Sidetrack.